how synergistic are those interventions? So I could imagine drinking cacao and coffee and green tea. Does it give me an added benefit, or is it probably just better to just stick to cacao or to tea or to coffee?
Yeah, I think the synergistical effects are very important because all those compounds work together, and that also explains why this shift from separate nutrients to whole foods has a very high yield. Because we see all those bioactive molecules, they work together. And that's very interesting because you have some, for example, studies which appeared in the journal, in important medical journals. And for example, where people were given vitamin B9 and vitamin B12, for example. And then they saw no effects on cardiovascular disease. But if they gave vitamin B9, B12, and B6 and B2, and then they saw an interesting reduction in cardiovascular disease because all the B vitamins, they have to work together in the metabolism. So it's not a good approach to only test one or two nutrients, but you have to test the whole foods, and even more important is to combine those foods. For example, if you combine cacao with green tea, with vegetables and a low glycemic index diet, you can have very interesting effects.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question back here?
Oh, yeah. All right.
Thank you for your talk. At the start of your talk, you said coffee lowers the risk of heart disease and a range of other illnesses, and then that alcohol lowers the risk of heart disease. There's a big difference between something lowering the risk of disease and something being associated with a lower risk of disease. And I wondered whether you really meant what you said, and if you did, what the evidence for that is, because you would normally need an intervention trial to show the latter, whereas the former can be concluded from observational studies, for which, as I know you know, there are many.
Indeed. I think that's a very interesting question, because we have a lot of information from those observational studies. And like I also mentioned in my lecture, those studies they are not very reliable, of course. But you can circumvent this problem a little bit by mainly focusing on the very large interventional studies which have appeared in very large and important journals, which indeed show that there are indeed interesting connections, but of course there's a difference between causality and correlation. But if you also reason more and you look at the metabolic pathways, then you can also speculate that, for example, coffee or other compounds can have interesting effects on your metabolism. For example, we have seen that coffee interferes with your TOR metabolism or with your NRF2 proteins and so on, that they upregulate antioxidant defense mechanisms. So you have this causality, and you have the correlations with the large observational studies. So I think if you focus or approach things more in a molecular way and in an observational study way and in a way and with a good background in biogerontology and processes involved in aging, that you can draw very interesting conclusions. And there have been interventional studies, so not a lot, of course, but there have been with interesting compounds and so on, and even compounds, but also with foods and so on, where people were put on a diet. For example, the diabetes patients, they were put on a fiber-rich diet, for example, which is an interventional study. They were given oatmeal, and compared to people who weren't given oatmeal. So you have interventional studies which show that you can at least maintain or obtain very interesting results.